Did you know the definition of dyslexia is changing for the first time in over 20 years? That shift could completely change how millions of children are identified and supported in schools. And here's the thing, if you're a parent or you're a tutor, this isn't just about new wording. It's about a new way of understanding why kids struggle with reading and what we can do to help them. So, we're going to be breaking this down together. Here's what we're going to cover. First, we're going to take a look at the old definition of dyslexia and compare it with the brand new 2025 update. And I'm going to show you the one change that most people overlook, but it makes a huge difference in how kids get identified. Next, we're going to dive into the brain. You're going to get to see how a typical readers process the words versus what happens in the brains of kids with dyslexia, and why that explains why smart kids can still find reading exhausting. Then we're going to talk about early identification. And this is the part that can literally change a child's school experience if caught in time. Most parents don't realize it can start as early as kindergarten. And finally, I'm going to share the essential ingredients of instruction for dyslexic students. Miss just one of these, and the progress slows down. But when you put them together, everything clicks. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what dyslexia is, the signs to watch for, and the steps that you can take to make sure that kids get the right support. Whether you're a parent, a tutor, or even a tutor that's working with students, but not necessarily in reading, you're going to start to understand what is specifically happening for some of your students. First, let's take a look at what the old definition of dyslexia was. It said dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, this old 2002 definition described dyslexia almost entirely as a phonological problem. In other words, difficulties with sounds and language. It also called these struggles unexpected. So if a child did well in other areas, but they still struggled with reading, then it was labeled as dyslexia. But here's where things change. The 2025 draft is broader and more realistic. It acknowledges that dyslexia looks different in different languages, and it's not always about sounds like morphology. Morphology is the building blocks of words, but that can be a part of it too. And instead of being seen as a deficit, it's framed as being on the low end of a literacy continuum. And that shift matters. It tells us that A, dyslexia is real, and B, it is not the child's fault. So, what is the new definition for 2025? The new definition, right now it's in draft form. I was asked as a member of the International Literacy Association to be able to give my feedback on this. So this isn't in stone yet, but here's what it says. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability characterized by difficulties in word reading, affecting accuracy, speed, or both, and or spelling that can depend on the written language system. These difficulties reflect performance at the low end of a continuum of literacy skill and occur despite evidence aligned instruction that is effective for the individual's peers. The cause and development of dyslexias involve the interplay of multibiological and environmental influences. Phonological and or morphological difficulties are common but not always present. Among the secondary consequences are limitations in language development, an academic process, as well as challenges to the psychological well being and vocational opportunities. Although identification and targeted instruction are important at any age, language and literacy support before and during the early years of education can be particularly effective. So now we're saying, look, dyslexia is shaped by multiple biological problems and environmental influences. So there's this combination. This idea being built in that early intervention is absolutely key and that it can affect like what their lives will look like, what types of jobs will they be able to take on later on in life if it's not understood at its core level. So these are all really important things when it comes to thinking about what is dyslexia and how can we overcome it. And I want to share with you Kevin's story. So Kevin was super bright, loved talking about stories and books. And even when he read, he would make a ton of mistakes, totally understood absolutely everything that I read. His reading was painfully slow, and his phonemic awareness looked fine. So, under the old definition, he would have really slipped through the cracks. But the new definition explains his profile perfectly because Kevin wasn't lazy. He was dyslexic. And once his mom pursued an evaluation, things finally made sense. And he did qualify as a dyslexic. I would love to know if you were a parent of a child, have you ever had that moment when you just knew your child is smart, but for some reason reading just isn't clicking? If so, I would love to hear your story. Comment below. Let's take a look at the brain differences in typical versus dyslexic readers, because here's where the science gets fascinating. Brain imaging, like fMRIs, they actually show us that typical readers and dyslexic readers use different pathways when they're reading. So, a typical reader uses the left side of the brain that lights up three key areas. It's like a smooth highway where words, sounds, and meaning they just connect quickly and automatically. But readers with dyslexia, those left side pathways, they don't work the same. Instead, they rely more on the right hemisphere or the front part of the brain. It's like their brain is taking a detour. It works, but it's slower and it's more exhausting. And here's the hopeful part. With the right instruction, especially if it starts early, those brain pathways can change. We can rewire the brain for smoother, faster reading. And that's why early identification matters so much. We can now detect risk factors in kindergarten. Yeah, kindergarten. And when we step in early, kids stay on track instead of falling behind. I worked with a set of kindergarten twins. They showed early signs of phonemic awareness struggles, and because their parents acted right away, they stayed on grade level. They avoided that self doubt when it comes to reading, and they are the epitome of what can happen when dyslexia is really caught early. Now, they were never identified as dyslexic. However, we gave them that dyslexic intervention because they showed some of those early signs. And they were able to go through without ever having to get labeled as dyslexic to be able to get the interventions and the help that they wanted because they worked with me personally. Now, let's talk about instruction. Once you know a child is dyslexic, it's not enough to just practice more reading. Okay. If you're just like sitting there and they're practicing more reading and it's still slow, it's laborious, it's frustrating for them, they're just going to look at the pictures, especially if they just go into a corner and read, right? Now, they need specific structured support. So, we're going to talk about the 7 strands that we want to include. And that first strand is phonological awareness. Kids need to hear and play with sounds and words, breaking them apart, blending them together, connecting them, even to writing. So that encoding process. So decoding is where we're sounding out each letter. Encoding is where we're actually writing the letters down. This is the foundation. The next is letter formation and visual discrimination. So, you ever see your child really confuse that B, D, P, and Q? That slows kids down. I want you to think about what would the experience for you be like if you were listening to your child read and they have dyslexia, and every time they come to a word with a B, D, P, or Q, they have to stop, think. What sound does that letter make? Is that a B? Does it make B? Is it a D? Does it make D? Is it a Q? Does it make Q? This is a really frustrating process for kids, and it's why a lot of them will rely on guessing because they don't want to take the time to figure out what sound does that letter actually make. And sometimes the word makes sense in the sentence, but it doesn't visually look right. Next is systematic phonics and vowel patterns. Okay. English vowels can be tricky. Kids need to learn what the six syllable types are and see how that vowel changes depending on the pattern. And systematic phonics means that the phonics is taught from easiest to hardest skills so that they can begin getting into books and reading. Now you've created a blog post that goes into all of the different patterns that you can check on out. I'll leave a link inside of the description. I've also have a video where I go into every single one of these sounds that you can take a look at and see what sound that they make. In fact, I made them very early on in my tutoring career. Next is appropriate reading material. So, in the beginning, dyslexic students are going to thrive with decodable text, books that match what they've already learned. If the books are too easy or too hard, it's going to create frustration. But when we have books that are at the right level, it's going to build success. This doesn't mean that they can't ever begin reading regular leveled books. They absolutely can. They just need to have these beginning skills mastered before they're going to be able to go on in and be able to read some of the books that are higher level. Sight word instruction with multisensory methods needs to be built in. So, when we talk about that multisensory, we mean that the sight words need to be taught with movement. So, one way is with skywriting. So, I actually take my arm out like this. Do not allow there to be a bend in the elbow. And you write the word. You start from the top. If I'm going to write the word the, I'm going to write my T, my H, and then the E. You'll notice the shoulder movement is causing that important motion. So we don't want them writing like this because they're not getting the shoulder movement in there. We can also get something like sandpaper to write the letters on. That's going to give it a feeling texture to the writing experience. And you can also get like a squishy board that will, you can write the words on over and over, erase them, write them again. Another way is to tap it out. So if I have the word the, I might say THE spells the. This allows them to feel it and experience it in different ways and modality. Next up is fluency practice. So, once the phonics is in place, kids really need to begin reading with flow, right? They need to know that we have to stop at the punctuation. We cannot read past the punctuation. They need to read with expression and rhythm. And rereading familiar text is going to build speed. And we can't forget about comprehension, right? At the end of the day, reading isn't just about saying the words, it's about understanding them. Good instruction always ends with comprehension checks, discussions, higher level thinking. When tutors and parents make sure that these pieces are in place, kids with dyslexia can thrive. Each strand strengthens the others, just like in Scarborough's rope. And together they build this skilled, confident reader. Now, if you've not heard of Scarborough's rope, I'm going to show an image here on the screen so you can see exactly what it looks like. Scarborough's rope shows us how all of these strands work together: word recognition and language comprehension. They weave into this strong rope. But for dyslexic kids, the word recognition strands, they picture them as being more frayed. But with structured literacy, we can reweave those strands to make the rope strong again. So let's recap the new definition of dyslexia. The new definition is broader and more inclusive. It includes brain differences and why it's hard, not why kids aren't trying. And early identification is a game changer, and structured literacy works. Every child deserves the right instruction at the right time. Parents, if you're worried, I can do a free screening for your child and see could dyslexia be what's causing the problem? Because again, when we can catch this early on, everything changes. And tutors, we want to make sure that we're covering all of the strands, that we're able to hit those big pieces. We are able to focus most of our time on those phonics pieces early on. When they've developed those skills, we can begin to build in all of those other elements of reading that are absolutely necessary for success. Because when we do, we're not just helping kids read, we help them thrive. And together, we can change the story for kids with dyslexia from struggling readers to confident learners who know that they're capable of so much more. Don't forget, subscribe for more strategies and share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could inspire another parent or another tutor who's watching today.